"No one will believe me," she sobbed. "The Mafia boss promised they'll believe when they kneel." The chandeliers of the Grand Ravenshore Hotel did not just sparkle. They judged, suspended 20 feet above the ballroom floor like constellations of diamond and gilt. They cast a fractured, golden light over the city's elite. To Emma Blake, that light felt less like a celebration and more like an interrogation lamp. At 28 years old, Emma had mastered the art of being invisible in plain sight. It was a survival mechanism. By day, she was a paralegal at a mid-tier law firm, buried under discovery documents and aggressive emails, trying to make a dent in the mountain of student loans that claimed her paycheck before she even saw it. By night, she wore the stiff black uniform of the hotel's banquet staff, balancing trays of champagne and enduring the casual entitlement of people who spent more on a single pair of cufflinks than she earned in a year. Tonight was the Cole Foundation Charity Gala. It was the biggest night on the Ravenshore social calendar, a black-tie affair designed to wash the consciences of the wealthy while cementing their political alliances. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roast duck, and old money. Emma adjusted the collar of her uniform, wincing slightly as the starched fabric rubbed against her neck. She had been assigned to the VIP lounge, a semi-private enclave draped in velvet and shadowed by exclusivity, reserved for the heavy hitters. It was a good assignment on paper. Better tips, less walking, but it meant being in close proximity to the sharks. She picked up a fresh tray of crystal flutes, checking her reflection in the darkened window. She looked tired. Concealer could hide the dark circles, but it could not mask the exhaustion that lived in the slope of her shoulders. "Keep your head down," she told herself. "Just 4 more hours. 4 hours, and then you can go home, sleep for 3, and do it all again." She moved into the lounge, weaving through the clusters of men in tuxedos and women in silk gowns. The noise here was different than the roar of the main ballroom. It was a low, murmuring hum, the sound of deals being struck and secrets being traded. That was when she saw him. He was sitting in a high-backed leather wing chair in the far corner, separated from the rest of the room not by a velvet rope, but by a palpable aura of danger. Luca Marino. Even Emma, who tried to ignore the local gossip columns, knew the name. The rumors painted him as a ghost, a man who controlled the docks, the unions, and half the city council. Though his name never appeared on a single indictment, he was striking in a way that made the breath catch in her throat. He wore a suit cut so sharply it looked like a weapon, charcoal gray and tailored to perfection. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face that seemed carved from granite, handsome, but with a coldness that warned people away. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, but he wasn't drinking, he was watching. 2 men stood a few feet behind him, their posture relaxed, but their eyes constantly scanning the room. Bodyguards. Emma moved toward a nearby table to clear empty glasses. Feeling the weight of Luca's gaze sweep over the room, it passed over her without pausing, indifferent and icy. To him, she was part of the furniture. She preferred it that way. Well, look who it is. The voice was smooth, cultured, and instantly made Emma's skin crawl. She stiffened, gripping her serving tray tighter before turning around with a practiced, polite smile. "Good evening, Mr. Cole. Can I get you anything?" Adrian Cole stood too close. He always did. As the heir to the Cole real estate empire and the son of the man hosting tonight's gala, Adrian walked through the world as if he owned the very air other people breathed. He was undeniably attractive in a classic golden boy way, with blonde hair and a dazzling smile. But his eyes were glassy, and the scent of bourbon on his breath was strong. "You can get me a name, for starters," Adrian said, stepping into her personal space. He reached out, his fingers brushing the bare skin of her arm just above her elbow. His touch was damp and lingering. "You have been serving me drinks for an hour, and I still do not know who you are. I am just working." "Mr. Cole," Emma said, gently pulling her arm back. She took a subtle step in retreat, maintaining the professional barrier, just making sure everyone has what they need. Adrian chuckled, a low sound that vibrated in his chest. He took a step forward, closing the gap she had just created. "You are skittish. I like that. It is cute." Emma's heart began to thud, a distinct rhythm of warning against her ribs. She looked around, hoping a manager was nearby, but the lounge was busy, and no one was paying attention to a server being cornered by a billionaire's son. "I should get back to the bar," she said, her voice tight. "Enjoy the evening, sir." She turned to leave, but Adrian sidestepped, blocking her path. He wasn't aggressive, not overtly, but there was a weight to his presence, a silent insistence that he was not done with her. "Don't run off," he said, his smile tightening at the edges. "My father is giving a speech in 20 minutes. I need to sober up a little before I go out there and play the dutiful son. Why don't you bring a pitcher of water to the founder's suite? I can have someone send that up for you," Emma said, her instinct screaming. "I asked you," Adrian said. His voice dropped an octave, shedding the charm for a split second to reveal the petulance beneath. "Just bring the water. Room 304. Don't make me ask the manager. You know how my father gets when the service isn't up to par." He winked, the mask of charm sliding back into place, and walked away before she could respond. Emma stood frozen for a moment, her hands shaking slightly around the tray. She felt dirty, a sensation that had nothing to do with hygiene and everything to do with the way his eyes had raked over her. She retreated to the service station, tucking herself into the narrow hallway where the staff took their breathers. She needed a moment. Just 60 seconds to compose herself. From her vantage point near the service door, she could see back into the lounge. A commotion near the bar caught her eye. A heavy-set businessman, his face flushed with too much wine, had cornered a young catering girl. The girl looked terrified, clutching a tray of hors d'oeuvres as the man leaned over her, shouting something about a spilled drink. He grabbed the girl's wrist, shaking it. Emma flinched, about to step forward, about to do something stupid that would get her fired, when a shadow moved across the room. It was Luca. He moved with a fluid, predatory grace, covering the distance between his corner and the bar in silence. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply stepped between the businessman and the girl, his back to the terrified staffer. He placed one hand on the businessman's chest. It was a light touch, barely a push, but the man stopped mid-shout, looking down at the hand on his expensive tuxedo, then up into Luca's face. Emma couldn't hear exactly what Luca said. His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the jazz music playing in the background, but she saw the blood drain from the businessman's face. She saw the man's arrogance evaporate, replaced by a sudden, sobering terror. The man stammered an apology, not to Luca, but to the girl, and then practically ran toward the exit. Luca turned to the young caterer. He didn't smile. Emma doubted he knew how, but he nodded once, a sharp, respectful gesture, before turning and walking back to his seat as if nothing had happened. He had strict lines. Even a monster had a code. The realization lodged in Emma's mind, a jagged piece of information she didn't know what to do with. He was a criminal, a man who likely ordered deaths with the same casualness that others ordered coffee. Yet he had protected the girl when the respectable men in the room had looked away. "Emma, get moving." The sharp voice of her manager, David, snapped her back to reality. He was standing at the service station, looking stressed, clutching a clipboard. "Mr. Cole just called down. He's waiting for that water in the founder's suite. Why are you standing here?" "David, please," Emma said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He is weird. He was touching me. Can't you send Mark or anyone else?" David sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. He did not look malicious, just tired and cowardly. "Look, Emma, the Coles are the reason we all have jobs tonight. If Adrian wants water from a specific server, he gets it. Just go up there, drop it off, and come right back. Keep him happy. We cannot risk offending the hotel's biggest client over a bottle of water. But go, now. Or don't bother clocking in tomorrow." The threat hung in the air, heavy and final. Emma looked at David, seeing the resolve in his weak chin. She thought of the eviction notice that had been threatened last month. She thought of the empty refrigerator and the student loan collection calls she had been dodging. She swallowed her fear, the taste bitter like aspirin. Fine. She prepared a silver tray with a crystal pitcher of ice water and 2 glasses. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt like ascending into a different atmosphere, the air pressure building until her ears popped. The hallway of the founder's suite was quiet, lined with thick plush carpet that swallowed the sound of her footsteps. She reached room 304. The door was solid mahogany. She knocked. "Room service?" She called out, hoping her voice sounded steady. "Come in." Adrian's voice came from the other side. "It is unlocked." Emma took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The suite was massive, a sprawling expanse of luxury with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Raven Shore skyline. The lights were dimmed low. Adrian was standing by the window, his tuxedo jacket discarded on a chair, his tie undone. She walked briskly to the low coffee table, setting the tray down with a clatter she hadn't intended. "Here is the water, Mr. Cole," she said, not looking at him. "Is there anything else?" She turned to leave immediately, her body tense, ready to bolt. Adrian moved faster than she expected. By the time she turned, he was there, between her and the door. He wasn't smiling anymore. His expression was flat, glazed over with entitlement and something darker, hunger. "You are in such a rush," he said. "I have to get back to work," Emma said, stepping to the side to go around him. He mirrored her movement, blocking her again. "You are working right now," he said. "You are taking care of a VIP guest. That is your job, isn't it? To serve?" "Please move," Emma said, her voice hardening. She abandoned politeness. The alarm bells in her head were now a deafening siren. Adrian laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. He reached out and grabbed her upper arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh. "Don't be a bitch. I just want to have a little fun. You've been looking at me all night. I saw you. I wasn't looking at you," Emma snapped, trying to wrench her arm free. "Let go of me. No." The word was a slap in the face. He yanked her toward him, the smell of bourbon and expensive musk overwhelming her senses. Emma reacted on instinct. She shoved him, hard, her hands slamming against his chest. "Get off!" she screamed. Adrian stumbled back a step, surprise flickering across his face, followed immediately by rage. His jaw tightened. "You do not say no to me!" He snarled. He lunged. Emma tried to run, but the heavy coffee table was behind her. She tripped, catching herself on the edge of the sofa, and before she could regain her balance, he was on her. He grabbed her jaw, his fingers squeezing so hard she felt her teeth grind together, forcing her head up to look at him. His eyes were void of humanity. There was no negotiation in them, only the cold, hard certainty of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. "No," Emma choked out, striking at him, her nails raking across his neck. He didn't even flinch. He used his weight to pin her against the back of the sofa, crushing the air from her lungs. The fabric of her uniform tore with a sickening rip as his hand grasped at her shoulder. "Stop, please." Her plea died in the heavy silence of the soundproofed room. The world narrowed down to the pressure of his body, the heat of his breath, and the terrified, erratic beating of her own heart. She fought, she kicked and scratched, a feral animal caught in a steel trap. But he was heavier, stronger and fueled by a twisted rage. The struggle became a blur of motion and pain. And then, the crushing realization that she could not win. The moment her physical strength failed, her mind fractured, detaching from the horror of the present to survive the minutes to come. The scene faded into a gray, suffocating haze. Her screams trapped in her throat, her body going still not out of consent, but out of the primal need to survive the breaking. Time lost its meaning. It could have been 10 minutes or 10 hours later when the door to room 304 opened. Emma stumbled into the hallway. She felt disjointed, as if her limbs belonged to someone else. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, the fabric hanging loosely, exposing bruised skin. Her hair, usually pulled back in a tight, professional bun, was falling around her face in tangled strands. Her mascara had run, leaving dark, jagged streaks down her pale cheeks. She walked unsteadily, hugging herself. her arms wrapped tight around her torso to hold the shattered pieces of her dignity together. A security guard was standing at the end of the hall, near the elevators. He looked up as she approached. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance, the torn dress, the hollow, 1,000-yard stare, the red marks on her neck. Then he looked past her. Emma turned her head slowly. Adrian stood in the doorway of the suite. He had fixed his tie. He was straightening his diamond cufflinks, his face composed, smug, untouched. He looked like a man who had just finished a business meeting. He caught the guard's eye and gave a small, dismissive nod. The security guard looked back at Emma. He saw the truth written on her skin. He saw the crime, and then he looked down at his shoes, turning his body slightly away from her, rendering himself blind and deaf to her existence. He wasn't going to help. No one was going to help. A sob clawed its way up Emma's throat, but she swallowed it down, tasting copper. She didn't wait for the elevator. She pushed through the heavy fire exit door and ran. She ran down the concrete stairs, flight after flight, her heels clicking in erratic rhythm that echoed like gunshots in the stairwell. She didn't stop at the lobby. She burst out through the service exit at the back of the hotel, into the loading dock alleyway. The cold night air hit her like a physical blow. It was raining, a light, freezing drizzle that mixed with the sweat and tears on her face. The alley smelled of wet cardboard and exhaust fumes. Emma collapsed behind a large metal dumpster, her legs finally giving out. She curled into a ball, pressing her forehead against her knees, rocking back and forth. "No one," she whispered, the words breaking apart. "No one will believe me." She said it again, louder, a mantra of despair. "No one will believe me. Look at him. Look at me." She was a waitress with debt. He was a coal. The equation was simple, brutal, and unbreakable. She gasped for air, her chest heaving, drowning in the feeling of his hands still on her skin, the phantom weight of him crushing her into the darkness. She was completely alone, or so she thought. Above her, tucked into the shadows of the loading bay overhang, a small red light blinked on a security camera. And inside, a black SUV parked down the street. A man watching a tablet screen saw the grainy, black and white feed of a woman collapsing in the rain. The back door of the hotel opened again, quietly this time. Luca Marino stepped out. He had left the gala early, bored by the pageantry and the hypocrisy. He preferred the silence of the alley to the noise of the ballroom. He reached into his pocket for his platinum cigarette case, but stopped. He heard the sound first, a ragged, wet sound, the sound of a human being coming undone. He turned his head, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He saw her, a woman, crouched behind the dumpster, shaking so violently it looked like she was seizing. Luca took a step closer, his shoes silent on the wet pavement. He recognized the uniform, hotel staff. He narrowed his eyes, studying the details that a lesser man would have missed, the torn fabric at her shoulder, the dark bruising already blooming on her upper arm, shaped like fingers, the streaks of mascara that looked like war paint, and the way she was holding herself, protecting her core, hiding from the world. He'd seen that posture before. He'd seen it in war zones, in interrogation rooms, in the eyes of people who had just realized that the world was a cruel, godless place. He paused, the unlit cigarette forgotten in his hand. The image of the girl in the lounge came back to him, the one he had watched from across the room, the one who had looked tired but professional. This was the same woman. Something cold and sharp settled in Luca's chest. He did not tolerate chaos, and he certainly did not tolerate the abuse of the weak by the strong, unless he was the one sanctioning it for a reason. This was not reason. This was wreckage. He watched her for another moment, seeing the absolute devastation in the curve of her spine. He didn't approach her. Not yet. She was a wounded animal. If he stepped too close, she would run, or she would break completely. Instead, he turned to the man standing in the shadow of the doorway, his head of security. "Marco," Luca said. His voice was low, barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a sounding block. "Yeah, boss," Marco answered, stepping forward. Luca gestured slightly toward the sobbing woman, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark and terrible. Find out who did that to her. The morning sun did not bring clarity. It brought a harsh, exposing glare that made Emma feel raw. She sat in the interrogation room of the 4th Precinct, a space that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. The metal table was cold against her forearms, but she barely felt it. She was still vibrating with the aftershocks of the night before, a continuous, low-frequency tremor that rattled her bones. Detective Miller sat across from her. He was a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a suit that had seen better decades. For the first 20 minutes, he had been attentive, nodding as Emma recounted the timeline, his pen scratching rhythmically against his notepad. She told him about the gala, the assignment to the VIP lounge, the request for water. Then she reached the name. It was Adrian Cole, she said, her voice cracking but the words distinct. The pen stopped moving. Detective Miller looked up, his brows knitting together. He did not write the name down. Instead, he set the pen on the table, a slow, deliberate movement that made the air in the small room suddenly heavy. Adrian Cole, Miller repeated. As in, the son of Gregory Cole? The Cole Foundation? Yes, Emma said. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold her shattering composure together. He forced me into the suite. Room 304. Miller sighed, leaning back in his chair. The sympathetic hunch of his shoulders straightened into something more guarded, more bureaucratic. He looked at Emma not as a victim, but as a problem, a complex pile of paperwork and political landmines that he did not want to step on. Miss Blake, Miller said, his tone shifting from investigative to cautionary. That is a very serious accusation against a very prominent figure. Are you absolutely certain about the events? It was a party. There was alcohol. Is it possible that signals were mixed? That perhaps things got out of hand, but it was not? What you are saying it was? I was working, Emma said, the injustice flaring hot in her chest, burning through the numbness. I was not drinking. I was serving water. He locked the door. He tore my dress. Miller glanced at the plastic bag containing her torn uniform, which sat on the corner of the desk. He looked at it with skepticism, as if the ripped fabric could have been a fashion choice. We processed the kit, Miller said, referring to the invasive, humiliating examination Emma had endured an hour earlier. But I have to be honest with you. Cases like this, involving people of that stature, they get complicated. Complicated how? Emma asked. Chain of custody issues, Miller said, waving a hand vaguely. Without witnesses inside the room or clear audio, it becomes a he said, she said situation. And the Coles have a legal team that costs more per hour than this precinct's entire annual budget. Unless we have concrete proof, something undeniable, the district attorney is going to hesitate. They do not like to swing at the king and miss. I am telling you what happened, Emma insisted, her voice rising. Look at the bruises on my arm. Look at my neck. Miller stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. He looked regretful, but in a distant professional way. We will file the report, Miss Blake. We will look into the hotel cameras. But do not get your hopes up. The Coles value their privacy. Those tapes have a way of disappearing or being corrupted. Emma walked out of the precinct into the blinding daylight, feeling lighter in the worst possible way. She had been hollowed out. She had offered them her truth, bleeding and jagged, and they had looked at it and asked if she was sure she hadn't just misunderstood the knife. She felt unheard. She felt humiliated. And for the first time, she understood that the truth was not a shield. It was just a story, and hers was worth less than Adrian Cole's silence. 2 days later, the second blow landed. Emma sat in the sterile, glass-walled office of the Human Resources Director at the law firm where she worked. She had come in early, hoping to bury herself in case files, to find some semblance of normalcy in the routine of legal research. Instead, her access badge hadn't worked at the turnstile. The security guard, a man she greeted every morning, had awkwardly escorted her to this office. The HR director, a woman named Sarah, who usually offered Emma peppermint candies, refused to meet her eyes. We have received some concerning reports. Sarah said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was not a termination letter, but it was the next closest thing. Reports? Emma asked, staring at the paper. It was a notice of administrative leave. From the gala, Sarah said, her voice tight. Several guests complained about your behavior. They stated you were acting unstable, erratic. We've been told there was an altercation with a VIP guest that reflected very poorly on the firm's reputation. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Altercation? I was assaulted up. Sarah held up a hand, stopping her. Emma, please. We're not here to litigate personal matters. The firm has a strict code of conduct regarding public appearances. Given the severity of the complaints and the importance of the client involved, we are placing you on unpaid leave pending an internal review. Unpaid? Emma whispered. I have rent, I have loans. You know, I cannot survive a month without a paycheck. I am sorry, Sarah said, finally looking at her. The pity in her eyes was worse than the coldness. It was the pity one felt for a wounded animal that was about to be put down. My hands are tied. The partners were very clear. Emma stood up, her legs shaking. It is the Coles, isn't it? They called the partners. Sarah did not answer. She just looked down at her hands, clasping her pen like a lifeline. Emma left the building carrying a cardboard box with a potted succulent and her stapler. She walked out the revolving doors, the city skyline looming over her. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a fortress, and she was on the outside. Adrian Cole hadn't just hurt her body. He was dismantling her life, brick by brick, just to ensure she didn't have the footing to stand up and point a finger. Across the city, in a building that did not have a sign. Luca Marino sat in a darkened room illuminated only by the glow of multiple monitors. The air was cool, conditioned to protect the servers humming in the racks along the wall. Nico, his lead technician, sat at the controls, his fingers flying over a backlit keyboard. We pulled everything from the hotel's hard drives before their security team could scrub it, Nico said, his voice flat. It took some doing to bypass the encryption on the VIP floor, but we got it. Show me, Luca said. He stood behind Nico's chair, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stone. He had been thinking about the girl in the alleyway for 48 hours. He had not forgotten the look in her eyes, the way she had crumbled. It was rare for Luca to obsess over a stranger, but the injustice of it sat in his gut like a swallowed stone. Nico brought up the feed. The video was grainy, shot from a hallway camera near the elevators. It showed Emma walking toward room 304 carrying a tray. She looked composed, professional. She knocked, she entered. Fast forward, Luca commanded. Nico tapped a key. The timestamp jumped 20 minutes. The door to the suite opened. Emma stumbled out. Luca leaned in closer to the screen. The resolution was high enough to see the details. Her hair was wild. Her dress was hanging off one shoulder. She wasn't just walking, she was fleeing. Her body language screaming trauma. She looked back at the door once, terrified, before running toward the stairwell. Then, the camera caught the doorway again. Adrian Cole appeared. He looked calm. He adjusted his cufflink. He watched her run. Pause, Luca said. The image froze on Adrian's face. It was the face of a man who believed he was untouchable. A man who thought the world existed solely for his consumption. Luca knew that face. He had seen it on rival bosses, on corrupt politicians, on men he had buried in the foundations of the very buildings the Coles built. This is leverage, Nico said quietly, reading the room. Gregory Cole has been pushing hard on the waterfront development. He's trying to squeeze the unions out. If we hold this over his son. Luca did not answer immediately. Yes, it was leverage. In his world, everything was a currency. Secrets, lies, violence. This footage was a nuclear weapon in the war for the port project. He could use it to force Gregory Cole to back down, to secure his territory for another decade. But as he looked at the frozen image of Emma, blurring in motion, small and shattered against the grand hallway, he felt a surge of anger that had nothing to do with business. It wasn't just about the port, it was about the principle. The Coles were not just greedy, they were rot, and rot had to be cut out. Find everything, Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous. I want to know where she lives. I want to know who her friends are. I want to know what the police did when she went to them. You think she went to the cops? Nico asked. Luca looked at the screen, at the terror in Emma's posture. She has spirit. She went, and I guarantee they spat in her face. The internet was a hive of cruelty, and Emma was the honey. By Friday evening, the story had leaked. A gossip blog known for its vicious, pay-to-play takedowns had run a headline, "Paralegal Partier, the truth about the gala drama." Emma sat on her couch, her phone burning in her hand. She scrolled, unable to stop herself. The article painted a twisted, unrecognizable picture. It claimed unnamed sources saw her drinking on the job, flirting aggressively with Adrian Cole, and then trying to extort him for money when he rejected her advances. It was a lie so bold it left her breathless. Then came the comments. She looks like trouble. Everyone knows the Coles are targets for gold diggers. Nice try. Honey, I heard she got fired from her law firm for being crazy. Who believes a woman like that? Strangers. Hundreds of them. People who did not know her name, her favorite color, or the sound of her laugh were dissecting her character based on a lie, bought and paid for by a billionaire's PR team. Her direct messages were filled with vitriol, names she couldn't repeat, suggestions that she should kill herself, threats that made her skin crawl. She threw the phone across the room. It hit the opposite wall with a dull thud. But the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was heavy with the realization that she was completely surrounded. The system, the workplace, the public. They had all linked arms to form a wall around Adrian Cole, and she was on the outside, screaming into the void. She needed air. She needed to breathe something other than the stagnant atmosphere of her apartment. She grabbed her coat and a folder containing the few documents she had, the police report copy, the medical discharge papers. She didn't know where she was going. Maybe back to the precinct to beg them to look again. Maybe just to walk until her legs gave out. It was late. The streetlights in her neighborhood were yellow and flickering, casting long, jumping shadows on the pavement. Ravenshore was a city of contrasts, and her block was on the wrong side of the divide. She walked with her head down, clutching the folder to her chest like a shield. The streets were mostly empty, but the hair on the back of her neck stood up. The sensation of being watched, which had started at the gala, had never left her. She turned a corner, heading toward the subway station, and stopped. Two men were blocking the sidewalk. They were not muggers. Muggers were desperate and twitchy. These men were still... They wore long, dark coats that looked expensive, the kind that concealed things. They were big, blocking out the light from the street lamp behind them. Emma Blake? The one on the left asked. His voice was gravel. Emma took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who are you? Friends of the Cole family," the man said. He took a step forward. "We are here to give you some friendly advice. You are making a lot of noise. Emma, you are embarrassing important people." "Leave me alone," Emma said, her voice shaking but loud. "Drop it," the second man said. He was wider, with a scar running through his eyebrow. "Drop the case. Drop the accusations. Go away. If you keep pushing, you are going to ruin your life. And accidents happen. Emma, pretty girls get hurt in this city every day." Emma turned to run, but they were faster. The wide man lunged, grabbing her arm, the same arm Adrian had bruised. He shoved her hard. Emma flew backward, slamming into the brick wall of the nearest building. The folder flew from her hands, papers scattering across the wet pavement like white feathers. Her head cracked against the brick, stars bursting in her vision. She slid down the wall, gasping. The first man loomed over her. "You're not listening, bitch." "We said drop it, why?" He raised a hand, not a fist, but an open palm, ready to slap the message into her. Emma flinched, closing her eyes, waiting for the pain. It never came. Tires screeched, a harsh, violent sound that tore through the quiet street. Emma opened her eyes. A massive black SUV had mounted the curb, its headlights blindingly bright, cutting through the gloom. The doors flew open before the vehicle had even fully stopped. 3 men poured out. They moved with a synchronized, lethal efficiency that made the Cole enforcers look like playground bullies. The first man from the SUV didn't speak. He simply drove his shoulder into the chest of the wide man, sending him sprawling into the gutter. The second man produced a baton, extending it with a sharp snap, and swung it low, taking the other attacker out at the knees. It was over in 6 seconds, the Cole enforcers, realizing they were outmatched by a magnitude of professional violence they hadn't anticipated, scrambled up and ran, disappearing into the dark. Emma remained pressed against the wall, sliding down until she hit the pavement, trembling violently. She looked at the men who had saved her. They didn't look like police. They looked like soldiers in expensive suits. Then, a fourth door opened. Luca Marino stepped out into the pool of headlight beams. He was not rushing. He buttoned his jacket as he walked toward her, his face calm, almost bored, as if the violence that had just occurred was as mundane as checking the mail. He stopped in front of her. He loomed large, blocking out the streetlights, casting her in his shadow. But this shadow didn't feel cold. It felt solid. He crouched down, balancing on the balls of his feet, bringing his face level with hers. "Are you broken?" he asked. It wasn't a philosophical question. He was asking about bones. Emma shook her head, though she wasn't sure. I don't think so." Luca's eyes scanned her face. He saw the red mark on her cheek where she had hit the wall. He saw the terror dilating her pupils. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he reached out. His hand was large, warm, and rough-skinned. He extended 2 fingers, gently hooking them under her chin. He lifted her face to the light. The touch was agonizingly tender, a stark contrast to the violence of the men who had cornered her, and the violence of the man in the hotel room. He tilted her head to the side, examining her lip where the skin had split from the impact against the wall. A tiny bead of blood welled there. Luca's thumb brushed near it, not touching the wound, but hovering close. His eyes darkened, shifting from calculation to a simmering, volcanic anger. "Who hurt you first?" he asked. His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated through her. He wasn't asking about the 2 men who had just run away. He was asking about the bruise on her arm, the shadow in her eyes, the reason she was walking alone with legal documents at midnight. Emma looked at him, paralyzed by the intensity of his gaze. She saw a man who was dangerous. Yes. But for the first time in days, she saw a man who was actually seeing her. 20 minutes later, Emma sat in a booth upholstered in red velvet. The sign on the door said Il Corsaro, but the restaurant was closed. The chairs were overturned on the tables, casting long, skeletal shadows in the dim light. The air smelled of garlic, oregano, and lemon polish. Luca had brought her here. He hadn't given her much of a choice, though he hadn't forced her. He had simply opened the car door and said, "It is not safe for you to go home tonight." And Emma, exhausted and hunted, had believed him. She sat with a glass of water in front of her. Her hands were still shaking, creating ripples on the surface of the liquid. Luca sat opposite her. He had removed his jacket, draping it over the back of the booth. He wore a black dress shirt, the top button undone, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were thick with muscle and mapped with faint, white scars. "Tell me," he said. Emma looked up. "Why? Why do you care? You are—" She trailed off. She knew what he was. Everyone knew. "I'm a man who dislikes bullies," Luca said simply, "and I have an old score to settle with the name Cole. But right now, that does not matter. What matters is that you are drowning, Emma, and I am the only boat in the water." Emma let out a dry, bitter laugh that turned into a sob. "You cannot help me. I went to the police. They laughed at me. I went to my job. They fired me. The internet thinks I am a criminal." She looked him in the eye, her own filling with fresh tears. "No one believes me. Luca, no one." Luca listened in silence. He did not interrupt. He did not offer platitudes. He waited until she had poured it all out. The assault, the police station, the HR meeting, the alleyway. When she was finished, silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. Luca reached into a leather satchel next to him. He pulled out a sleek, black tablet. He tapped the screen once and slid it across the table toward her. Emma looked down. It was the video. She watched herself walking down the hallway. She watched the door open. She watched herself stumble out, her dress torn, her face a mask of horror. And then she saw Adrian, the smugness, the adjustment of the cufflinks. It was not inside the room, but it was damning. It showed the aftermath. It showed the truth of her terror and his indifference. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You have it. You have the tape." "Partial," Luca corrected, "but enough to start a war." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His dark eyes locked onto hers, burning with a fierce, terrifying promise. "You say no one believes you," Luca said softly. "You are looking for justice in a system built by men like Gregory Cole to protect men like Adrian Cole. You will never find it there. The law is a spider web. It catches the flies and lets the hawks fly through." He reached across the table, his hand resting near hers, offering an anchor. "But there is another way." Emma looked from the tablet to him. "What way?" Luca's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "They will believe when they kneel," he said. The words hung in the air, absolute and final. "If you let me help," Luca continued, his voice steady as a heartbeat, "I will burn their world down until the only thing left standing is your truth. But you have to trust me, and you have to be ready to fight dirty." Emma looked at the tablet, then at the scarred hand of the Mafia boss. She thought of the police detective's skepticism. She thought of the HR director's pity. She thought of Adrian's laugh in the hotel room. She took a breath, the air trembling in her lungs. "Okay," she whispered. Luca nodded once. It was a pact sealed in the quiet of a closed restaurant, a promise of violence and vindication that would shake the city to its foundations. "Eat," Luca said, pushing a basket of bread toward her. "We have work to do." The restaurant booth felt less like a sanctuary and more like a confessional where the priest was the devil himself. Emma stared at the tablet, the glowing screen illuminating the sharp angles of Luca Marino's face. The video froze on Adrian's smug expression, a digital ghost haunting the red velvet upholstery. "They will believe when they kneel," Luca had said. The promise was seductive. It tasted like retribution. For a heartbeat, Emma wanted to drink it down, to let this dangerous man loose on the people who had shattered her life. But then the reality of who sat across from her crashed in. This was Luca Marino. He was not a lawyer. He was not a detective. He was a man who solved problems with silence and cement. "No," Emma said, pushing the tablet back across the table. Her voice shook, but the refusal was clear. Luca did not blink. "No? I cannot do this," Emma said, standing up. Her legs felt weak, but she forced them to hold her weight. "I want justice. Luca. Real justice. I want a judge to bang a gavel. I want a jury to say the words. I do not want... Whatever this is, I do not want a turf war. I do not want people getting hurt because of me. People are already hurting you," Luca pointed out, his voice calm, terrifyingly reasonable. "The law failed you yesterday. It will fail you tomorrow. I have to try," Emma insisted. She grabbed her folder of documents, hugging it to her chest like a shield made of paper. "I am not a criminal. I'm not like you." She turned and walked out of the restaurant, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully, a stark contrast to the dread pooling in her stomach. She expected him to stop her. She expected a hand on her arm, a command to sit down. But Luca let her go. He watched her leave, his expression unreadable, sipping his water as she disappeared into the rainy night. Emma held on to her faith in the system for exactly 3 more days. The system did not just fail, it actively dismantled what little she had left. It started on a Tuesday evening. Emma returned to her apartment building, a weary walk up the 4 flights of stairs that usually smelled of cabbage and floor cleaner. Today, it smelled of disaster. Tape was plastered across her door, bright neon orange paper. Notice of eviction. Emma stopped, her keys jangling in her trembling hand. She read the notice 3 times, the words swimming before her eyes. Failure to pay rent, Violation of lease agreement, clause 14B. I paid, she whispered to the empty hallway. I paid on the 1st. She pounded on the superintendent's door downstairs. Mr. Henderson, a man who had known her for 3 years and usually saved her Christmas packages, opened the door only a crack. He looked at her with eyes that were sliding away, refusing to make contact. I am sorry, Emma, he mumbled through the chain. New management company took over the building's accounts this morning. They did an audit. They say you are 3 months behind. I have receipts, Emma cried, digging into her bag. Mr. Henderson, you know I pay. I can show you the bank transfers. It is out of my hands, he said, and she heard the shame in his voice. They said you are a liability. Unstable character, police activity. You have to be out by tomorrow noon, or the sheriff comes. He closed the door. The click of the lock was final. Emma stood in the hallway, the realization washing over her like ice water. This was not a clerical error. This was Adrian Cole. He was not just satisfied with assaulting her. He was erasing her. He was showing her that the city she lived in belonged to him, from the skyscrapers to the tenements. She packed what she could into 2 suitcases. The rest, her furniture, her books, the life she had built over 5 years, she had to leave behind. She spent that night on her friend Jenna's couch. Jenna was a junior associate at the law firm, Emma's closest friend, the one person she thought would stand as a firewall against the chaos. The next morning, Emma was folding her blanket when Jenna walked into the living room. Jenna was dressed for work, holding a cup of coffee, looking pale. Emma, Jenna said, her voice tight. You have to go. Emma froze. What? Jenna, I have nowhere else. Just until I find a place. A couple of days. I got a call, Jenna said. She set the coffee down, her hands shaking. From a senior partner. They know you stayed here last night. How? Emma asked, horrified. I do not know. But they said if I harbor a former employee who is currently under investigation for corporate extortion, it reflects poorly on my judgment. They hinted at my review next month. Emma, my promotion. Jenna looked at her, tears welling in her eyes, but the self-preservation was stronger than the friendship. I have student loans too, Jenna whispered. I cannot lose this job. I am sorry. You have to leave. Now. Emma walked out of the apartment building into the blinding noon sun. She had 2 suitcases, $40 in her checking account, and no friends. She went to a motel on the outskirts of the city, but her credit card was declined. Frozen. Suspicious activity, the clerk said with a bored shrug. By nightfall, Emma was sitting on a bench in Riverside Park. The temperature had dropped, a biting wind whipping off the water. She pulled her coat tighter, curling her legs up under her. She clutched her phone, but she had no one left to call. Her parents were gone. She was an only child. Her network had been surgically severed. She watched the cars drive by on the distant avenue, streaks of red and white light. She felt small. She felt translucent, as if she were fading out of existence. Adrian Cole had not just raped her, he had murdered her life, and no one had even noticed the body drop. Her fingers were numb around her phone. She stared at the black screen. She thought about calling the police again, but the memory of Detective Miller's dismissive face stopped her. A car slowed down on the park drive. It was not a patrol car. It was a sleek black sedan, its windows tinted impossibly dark. It pulled to the curb 10 yards from her bench. Emma tensed, her hand diving into her pocket for her keys, a pathetic weapon against the world. The back door did not open. The driver's door did. A man stepped out. It was not the thugs who had cornered her before. It was a younger man, dressed in a sharp suit, looking like he belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than a park at midnight. Miss Blake? He asked respectfully. Emma did not answer. She shivered, her teeth chattering. Mr. Marino sent me, the driver said. He kept his distance, hands visible and empty. He heard about the apartment and the credit cards. Emma let out a ragged breath. Of course he knew. He probably knew before she did. I do not want to go to a warehouse, Emma said, her voice hoarse. I do not want to be in the dark. No warehouses, the driver promised softly. Just a place to sleep. A door that locks. Heat. Heat. The word broke her. The cold had settled deep into her marrow, a physical ache that mirrored the hollowness in her chest. She looked at her suitcases, then at the warm, waiting car. She was too exhausted to fight. She was too exhausted to be moral. "Okay," she whispered. The driver moved quickly, taking her bags. He opened the back door for her. The interior smelled of leather and nothing else. It was safe. They did not go to the mob-owned restaurant. They drove to a pre-war building in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. The driver escorted her up to the top floor. The apartment was not what she expected. It was not a bachelor pad of chrome and glass, nor was it a lavish palace of stolen gold. It was warm. The floors were hardwood, covered in thick, woven rugs. The walls were lined with bookshelves. A fire crackled in a gas fireplace, casting a gentle orange glow over the cream-colored furniture. "The bathroom is through there," the driver said, pointing. "There are clean clothes on the bed. A doctor is on his way." "A doctor?" Emma asked, blinking in the sudden warmth. "Mister," Marino insists, "you've been on the street for 12 hours, and you were injured before that." The driver left. Emma stood in the middle of the room, feeling like an intruder in a dream. 20 minutes later, a doctor arrived. An older man with kind eyes and a bag that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. He checked her blood pressure, examined the lingering bruises on her arm and the cut on her lip, and prescribed an antibiotic for a minor infection in the scratch on her shoulder. He asked no questions about how she got them. He treated her with a dignity that made her want to weep. When the doctor left, the apartment fell silent. Emma realized she was thirsty. She walked tentatively toward where she assumed the kitchen was. She pushed open the swinging door and stopped. Luca was there. He was leaning against the marble countertop, staring out the window at the city lights. He wore black trousers and a white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. He was smoking a cigarette, the smoke curling lazily toward the extractor fan, and he looked different here, less like a statue, more like a man. He heard her enter. He didn't jump. He simply turned. Saw her standing there in the oversized gray sweatpants and hoodie the driver had left for her, and immediately reached for the ashtray. He crushed the cigarette out, twisting it until the ember was dead. "I apologize," Luca said. His voice was low, filling the tiled room. "Bad habit." "It is your house," Emma said. Her voice sounded small to her own ears. "It is a safe house," Luca corrected. "Tonight, it is your house." He turned to the stove, where a kettle was just beginning to whistle. He silenced it before it could scream. He poured hot water into 2 ceramic mugs, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing to watch. Nothing was wasted. He slid a mug across the island counter toward her. "Chamomile," he said. "It helps with the shock." Emma walked forward and wrapped her hands around the mug. The heat seeped into her frozen fingers. She looked at the steam rising from the tea, and suddenly, the dam broke. It wasn't a sob. It was a shudder that started in her feet and rattled her teeth. "I feel so stupid," she whispered. Luca watched her, his own mug untouched. "Why?" "I walked into that room," Emma said, the words spilling out, acidic and burning. "He asked for water, and I went in. I should have known. I should have seen it in his eyes. The other girls knew. They stayed away from him. But I walked right in like a lamb." She squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out hot and fast. "I feel dirty. Luca, I scrubbed my skin in the shower until it burned, but I still feel him. I feel ruined. I lost my apartment. I lost my job. I lost my best friend. And I am standing in a mafia boss's kitchen wearing stolen clothes because I was too weak to stop a rich boy from taking what he wanted." She dropped her head, her shoulders heaving. The shame was a physical weight crushing her. She heard footsteps, slow, measured. Luca stopped in front of her. She could see his shoes. She could smell the faint scent of tobacco and sandalwood soap. She looked up. Luca was looking down at her, and his expression shattered her defense mechanisms. There was no pity in his eyes. Pity was cheap. Pity was what the HR director had given her. Luca looked at her with a fierce, solemn recognition. He looked at her like she was a fellow soldier who had been wounded, not a victim who had been broken. He raised his hands, but he stopped inches from her. He did not touch her. He waited. He held her gaze, asking a silent question, giving her the power to choose. "Can I?" Emma looked at him, this dangerous, violent man who had been the only person to treat her with gentleness. She nodded. A small, jerky motion. Luca moved. He didn't grab her. He took a step closer and unbuttoned his suit jacket. He took it off and wrapped it around her shoulders. The silk lining was warm from his body. It engulfed her, heavy and protective. Then, his arms came around her. He pulled her against his chest. It was not a lover's embrace. Not yet. It was a fortress closing its gates. One of his hands came up to cup the back of her head, pressing her cheek against his shirt, the other arm banded across her back, holding her together. "You are not ruined," Luca said, his voice rumbling against her ear. "You survived. Do not confuse the two." Emma let go. She buried her face in his shirt, clutching the fabric at his waist, and wept. She cried for the apartment, for the job, for the girl she used to be who believed the world was fair. Luca stood like a monolith. He took her weight. He absorbed her grief. The kitchen was quiet except for her ragged breathing. The proximity was intense. Emma became acutely aware of the steady, powerful thud of his heart against her cheek. It was slow, unbothered by the storm, a rhythmic anchor in the chaos. She felt the heat of him radiating through his shirt. She felt the calloused roughness of his hand as he began to rub her back. Slow, concentric circles, over and over, a hypnotizing motion. It wasn't sexual. It was grounding. He was tethering her back to the earth. "I have him," Luca murmured into her hair. "I have the footage. I have the leverage. But I need you to tell me what you want. Do you want to hide? I can hide you. You can disappear to Italy. Start over. No one will find you." He pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes. His hands stayed on her arms, warm and heavy. "Or," he said, "we can make them pay." Emma sniffled, wiping her face with the sleeve of the oversized hoodie. The warmth of his jacket was still around her. The smell of him was in her lungs. She didn't feel like a victim anymore. She felt angry. "I want them to pay," she said. Luca nodded, a grim satisfaction settling in his eyes. "Good." He stepped back, giving her space again, retrieving her tea. "We have a plan. My tech specialist, Nico, is digging. We are not just going to release the video. That is too easy for them to spin. We are going to dig up the bodies, metaphorically speaking. We are going to find the other women. We are going to find the payoffs Gregory Cole made to cover up Adrian's mess." "And then?" Emma asked. "And then," Luca said, "we leak it, not to the police, to the world. We choose the moment. We wait until they are standing tall, and then we cut the legs out from under them." Emma gripped the mug. It sounded terrifying. It sounded like war. "Luca," she said. "Yes? I have one condition." Luca raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "You cannot kill him," Emma said firmly. "I want him to lose everything. I want him to go to jail. I want him to feel what it is like to be powerless. But if you kill him, then he just disappears. And I become the reason a man is dead. I cannot live with that." Luca studied her for a long moment. He looked like he wanted to argue, like the violence in him was demanding a blood price. But he looked at her shaking hands, her red-rimmed eyes, and he inclined his head. "I will not kill him," Luca promised, "but I will make him wish he were dead. He will face what he did, every second of it." It was 3 a.m. when Emma gave up on sleep. The bed in the guest room was softer than clouds, but her mind was racing. She wandered out into the living room. Stepping softly on the plush rugs, the only light came from the city glow outside the panoramic window. Luca was sitting in a leather armchair, staring out at the skyline. He had taken his jacket back, but he hadn't put it on. It lay draped over the arm of the chair. He was in his shirt sleeves, rolled up to the elbows. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, resting it on his knee. His knuckles were scarred, white ridges of old violence against the tanned skin. He didn't turn when she entered. "Couldn't sleep?" "No," Emma said. She hugged her arms, feeling the phantom warmth of his embrace from earlier. She walked closer. She should be afraid of him. He was a criminal warlord planning the systematic destruction of a powerful family. But all she felt was a magnetic pull, a gravity drawing her toward the only solid thing in her universe. She stopped a few feet from his chair. "Thank you," she said softly. "For the tea, for the doctor, for believing me." Luca looked up then. His eyes were dark pools in the shadows. He looked tired, the weight of his own wars etched into the lines around his mouth. He stood up. He moved into her personal space, not aggressively, but inevitably. He stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him again, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. The air between them seemed to thicken, charging with a static electricity that made the hair on Emma's arms stand up. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was recognition. Two people who had seen the darkness and refused to let it swallow them. Luca looked at her mouth, then up to her eyes. His hand twitched at his side, as if he wanted to reach out, to finish what had started in the kitchen. To touch her, not to comfort, but to claim. Emma's breath hitched. She didn't step back. She wanted him to, God help her, she wanted him to erase the memory of Adrian's hands with his own. But Luca clenched his fist and exhaled slowly through his nose. He had promised to protect her, not complicate her trauma with his own desires. "Get some sleep, Emma," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Tomorrow, we go to war." The tension hung in the air, unresolved and heavy, vibrating like a plucked cello string. "Good night, Luca," Emma whispered. She turned and retreated to her room, leaving him standing in the dark, watching the city he was about to burn down for her. The penthouse was quiet. It was a silence that Emma Blake had never experienced in her life. Her old apartment in the crumbling walk-up had been a symphony of leaking pipes, arguing neighbors, and the constant dull roar of city traffic. Here, 40 floors above the streets of Ravenshore, the world was muted by triple-paned glass and heavy insulation. She stood in the center of the guest bedroom, which was larger than her entire previous apartment. The bed was draped in linens that felt like water against her skin. The bathroom had a soaking tub deep enough to drown in. It was a fortress of luxury, a sanctuary built by money and power. And yet, Emma felt like an intruder. She ran her hand over the polished mahogany dresser. Guilt sat heavy in her stomach, an indigestible stone. She was safe here, protected by men with earpieces and guns. While her life outside had been incinerated, she thought of Jenna, who might lose her promotion just for knowing her. She thought of her landlord, scrubbing her name off the mailbox. She felt like a ghost haunting a palace, consuming resources she had not earned, hiding behind a man whose very existence was a crime. Emma shook her head, forcing the thoughts away. Wallowing would not help. Action would. She left the room and walked down the long, art-lined corridor toward the living area. The penthouse was modern, stark and masculine, filled with dark leather and steel, but it was buzzing with activity. In the corner of the massive living room, Luca's tech specialist, Nico, had set up a command center. Monitors were stacked in a semicircle, cables snaking across the Persian rug like black vines. "Morning," Emma said. Clutching her coffee mug, Nico did not look up. His fingers were flying across a backlit keyboard. "Morning. Grab a chair. We're making progress on the audio reconstruction." Emma pulled a chair close to the monitors. On the screen was a waveform, jagged and messy. It was the audio stripped from the hotel hallway camera, the one that had captured her fleeing room 304. "The quality is garbage," Nico admitted, tapping the screen. "The hotel uses cheap microphones that pick up more elevator hum than human speech. But I have been running filters all night. I isolated the frequency of the door opening and the ambient noise of the hallway." "Can you hear him?" Emma asked, her voice tight. "Listen," Nico said. He pressed a key. Through the speakers came a wash of static, a high-pitched whine, and then, faint but distinct, a voice, playing the victim. It was Adrian. The sound of his voice, even distorted and tinny, made Emma's skin crawl. She gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles turning white. "We need more," Nico said, frustration evident in his tone. "We have the video of you leaving. We have this fragment. It proves he was there, and it proves he was hostile. But to bury him? To make sure he never climbs out of the hole we are digging? We need a witness." "I told you," Emma said, staring at the waveform. "The security guard saw me. He saw Adrian standing in the doorway. He looked right at me." "We tracked him," Nico said. He glanced at a notepad. "Name is Gary Wilson. He called in sick the day after the gala and has not been back to work since. His bank account shows a deposit of $10,000 made in cash yesterday." "Payoff," Emma whispered. "It is standard operating procedure for the Coles," a deep voice said from behind them. Emma turned. Luca was standing there. He had just come from the gym he had installed in the second bedroom. He wore a gray t-shirt that clung to his chest and sweatpants, a towel draped over his neck. He looked less like a kingpin and more like a fighter between rounds. "They buy silence before the police even start asking questions," Luca said, walking over to look at the monitors. 10,000 is cheap. "It means the guard is scared. If he took the money, he will never testify," Emma said, feeling the hope deflate in her chest. "He might," Luca said, "if he realizes that the Coles treat loose ends like liabilities. But we cannot rely on him. We need you, Emma. If this goes public, you are the primary witness. You have to be ready to speak, to say the words out loud to a camera, to a judge, to the world." "I am ready," Emma said. "Show me," Luca challenged gently. He pulled a chair around so he was facing her, his knees inches from hers. Nico politely put on noise-canceling headphones and turned back to his screens, giving them a bubble of privacy. "Tell me what happened," Luca said. "Pretend I am the press. Pretend I am the defense attorney who wants to tear you apart." Emma took a breath. I went to the room to deliver water." "Louder," Luca commanded. "Look at me. Do not look at the floor. If you look down, they will say you are lying." Emma lifted her chin. "I went to the room. Adrian Cole was there. He blocked the door, and then he grabbed me." Emma's heart began to hammer against her ribs. The room seemed to shrink. She wasn't in the penthouse anymore. She was back in the suite, smelling the bourbon, feeling the crushing weight of him. "He put his hands on me," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I told him no. I tried to push him away." Suddenly, the image in her mind shifted. She saw the flashbulbs of cameras. She saw the comments section on the internet scrolling endlessly. Liar, whore, gold digger. She saw her parents' faces, dead and gone, looking down in shame. She saw the entire world laughing at her, pointing fingers, stripping her bare. "I can't," Emma gasped. The air caught in her throat. She couldn't breathe. Her chest felt like it was in a vice. "I can't do it. They won't believe me." She stood up, panic seizing her limbs, making her sway. Luca was on his feet instantly. He didn't grab her. He stepped into her line of sight, blocking out the rest of the room. "Emma," he said. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, resonant anchor dropped into the middle of her storm. "I can't breathe," she wheezed, clutching her chest. "Yes, you can," Luca said. He reached out and took her hands. His palms were warm and rough. He held her fingers firmly, not squeezing, but grounding her. "Look at me," he ordered. "Just me. Ignore the room. Ignore the cameras in your head. Just look at my eyes." Emma forced her eyes to lock onto his. They were dark, steady, and devoid of judgment. They were the only stable thing in a spinning universe. "Breathe in," Luca said. 1, 2, 3. "Hold it." Emma drew in a ragged breath, her lungs burning. "Now out, slow, push it all the way out." She exhaled, a shuddering sound. "Again," Luca said, his thumbs moving over the backs of her hands. "In, with me." He breathed with her, exaggerating the motion of his chest so she could mimic it. They stood there for a long minute, just breathing. The panic began to recede, retreating like a tide, leaving Emma exhausted but present. Her breathing evened out. The room stopped spinning. She realized she was standing very close to him, their hands locked together between them. She should have pulled away. The panic was gone, but she didn't let go. Luca didn't let go either. He looked down at her, his expression softening from command to concern. His thumb traced a slow, soothing circle over her palm. The sensation sent a sudden, electric rush of heat up her arm, bypassing her brain and settling deep in her stomach. It was a jolt of awareness so sharp it almost hurt. "You are safe," Luca said quietly. "You are not there anymore. You are here, with me." Emma stepped closer. She couldn't help it. She was drawn to the quiet intensity of his gaze, to the sheer, undeniable strength that radiated from him. He was a dangerous man, a criminal, a killer perhaps, but in this moment, he was the only person who had ever made her feel completely safe. "Thank you," she whispered. Luca looked at her mouth, then back up to her eyes. His jaw tightened, as if he were holding back words, or perhaps actions, that would cross a line he had drawn for himself. He slowly released her hands, though his fingers lingered until the last possible second. "We will try again later," he said, his voice rough. "When you are ready. By evening." The penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like a home, albeit a temporary one. The tension of the investigation had given way to a quiet domestic lull. Emma found herself in the kitchen. She needed to do something with her hands other than wring them. She opened the massive refrigerator, finding it stocked with pristine, organic ingredients that looked like they had never been touched. She pulled out bell peppers, onions, garlic, and chicken. She found a knife block and a cutting board. "What are you doing?" Luca walked into the kitchen. He had changed into jeans and a black button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, rubbing the back of his neck. "Cooking," Emma said, "chopping an onion with rhythmic precision. I need to be useful. I cannot just sit around while Nico does all the work and you pay for everything. I am making stir-fry." "Do not argue," Luca blinked, looking at the pile of vegetables. "I was going to order takeout. I am cooking," Emma repeated firmly. "Grab a knife." To her surprise, the Mafia boss did not argue. He washed his hands and picked up a knife, looking at a red pepper with a mixture of suspicion and concentration. Emma watched him out of the corner of her eye. He moved with lethal grace when he was fighting or walking, but in the kitchen, he was surprisingly clumsy. He held the knife like a dagger, attacking the pepper rather than slicing it. The pieces were uneven, jagged chunks. It was endearing. It made him human. "No," Emma said, laughing softly. "Not like that. You're going to cut your finger off, and I do not know first aid." She set down her own knife and moved toward him. Without thinking, she reached around him to adjust his grip. "Here, let me show you," she said. She wrapped her hand over his right hand, guiding his fingers on the handle. Her left hand rested lightly on his forearm to steady it. "You have to let the knife do the work," she instructed. "Rock it back and forth." She guided his hand through a slice. "See? Smooth." Luca did not answer. Emma realized why. She was standing directly behind him, and reaching around to help him. She had pressed her body against his back. Her chest was brushed against his shoulder blade. Her face was inches from his neck. She froze. Luca went perfectly still. The silence in the kitchen was sudden and deafening. The domestic playfulness vanished, replaced by a crackling, high-voltage awareness. Emma could feel the heat of him through his shirt. She could smell the soap on his skin, mixed with the sharp scent of the cut peppers. She became hyper-aware of everything. The roughness of his hand under hers, the hardness of his back against her soft curves, the way his breathing had stopped. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. It was a precipice. Then, Luca turned his head slightly. His cheek brushed against her hair. "Emma," he murmured. It was a warning. It was an invitation. Emma stepped back quickly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm in her throat. She picked up her own knife, her hands shaking slightly. "Right," she said, her voice breathless. "Just, keep doing that." They finished cooking in silence, but the air between them had changed. It was charged, heavy with things unsaid, thick with a tension that felt like a storm about to break. After dinner, the mood shifted again. They moved to the living area. Nico had gone to sleep in one of the guest rooms, leaving the monitors dark. Soft music was playing from the speakers hidden in the ceiling. a forgotten playlist Nico must have left on. It was a slow, melancholic jazz track, a saxophone weeping over a steady bass line. Emma stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. They looked like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Somewhere out there. Adrian Cole was sleeping in a silk bed, thinking he had won. Luca came to stand beside her. He didn't look at the city. He looked at her reflection in the glass. "Dance with me," he said. It wasn't a question. Emma turned. "Why?" "Because the world is ugly," Luca said softly. "And for 5 minutes, I want to pretend it isn't." He held out his hand. Emma looked at it. She knew she should say no. She knew that every step she took toward him was a step deeper into a complication she might not survive. But she was tired of fear. She was tired of ugliness. She took his hand. Luca pulled her in. He didn't hold her like he had during the panic attack. This was different. He placed his hand respectfully at the small of her back, his touch firm but light. Emma rested her left hand on his shoulder, her fingers curling against the fabric of his shirt. They moved slowly, swaying to the rhythm of the saxophone. They didn't speak. There was no need. The language was in the movement. Emma felt the steady, protective strength beneath his shirt. He felt like a wall she could lean on, a shield that would never break. She rested her forehead against his jaw. His skin was warm, rough with 5 o'clock shadow. She closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of him. Luca's hand on her back moved slightly, his fingers spreading out, pulling her a fraction of an inch closer. She felt his chin rest on the top of her head. For a brief, stolen moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist. There were no cameras, no lawyers, no threats, just the music and the man holding her. Emma lifted her head. Luca was looking down at her. His eyes were half closed, dark with an emotion that terrified and thrilled her. He looked at her lips. Emma's breath hitched. She went up on her toes. Luca leaned down. His hand slid up her back to cradle her neck. They were an inch apart. She could feel his breath on her lips. The door to the hallway slammed open. "Boss!" Emma and Luca sprang apart as if a grenade had detonated between them. Nico burst into the room, his hair wild, a tablet in his hand. He looked pale. "Nico," Luca growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You better have a reason for barging in here." "I do," Nico said, breathless. "You need to see this. Now." Luca snatched the tablet. Emma moved to his side, her heart plummeting from the high of the almost kiss to the pit of her stomach. "What is it?" she asked. "The smear campaign," Nico said grimly. "It just escalated. It is not just gossip blogs anymore. Look at the photos." Emma looked at the screen. It was a photo of her. She was wearing the gala uniform, but she was smiling, laughing actually, with a glass of champagne in her hand, leaning against Adrian Cole's chest. His arm was around her waist. They looked like lovers. "That is not real," Emma cried. "I never drank. I never smiled at him." There were more. A photo of her getting into a luxury car that looked like Adrian's. A photo of her in what looked like a hotel room, looking disheveled but happy. Deepfakes, Nico said. High quality. They used AI to graft your face onto someone else's body. They just dropped these on every major social media platform. The narrative is that you were his paid escort for the night, and you are crying rape because he stopped payment. Emma felt the room tilt. The photos looked so real. If she didn't know the truth, she would have believed them. But then, a cold thought struck her, a thought sharp as a razor. She looked at the metadata timestamp Nico had pulled up on the side of the screen. The source of the leak. It traced back to a server she recognized, not the Coles. She looked at Luca. He was staring at the tablet, his face a mask of stone. He didn't look surprised. He looked angry. Yes, but not surprised. You knew. Emma whispered. Luca looked up, his eyes narrowing. What? You knew this was coming, she said, her voice rising. You have been monitoring their chatter. You told me you had eyes on everything. Did you know they were making these? Luca hesitated, a fraction of a second, but it was enough. I saw chatter about a digital counteroffensive, Luca admitted. I did not know they would be this high quality, but you let it happen, Emma accused. She stepped back from him. the warmth of the dance turning to ice in her veins. You let them release this. Why? So you could swoop in and save me? Or because the more they attack me, the worse they look when we finally drop the truth. Emma, listen to me, Lucas said, reaching for her. Don't touch me, she shouted, slapping his hand away. You are using me. I am just a weapon to you, aren't I? A pawn to hurt Gregory Cole. You saw a girl in an alley and you didn't see a person. You saw a strategic asset. Luca went still. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. In the beginning, yes, Lucas said. His voice flat and honest. When I found you, I saw leverage. I saw a way to break a man I have hated for 10 years. Emma let out a choke sound of betrayal. But that changed, Lucas said intensely, stepping forward. That changed the moment you sat in my kitchen and cried. It changed tonight. Well, Emma, I am not using you. I am trying to destroy them for you. I don't believe you, Emma said. Tears streamed down her face, hot and fast. You are just like them. It is all leverage. It is all power. And I am just the collateral damage. She turned and ran to the guest room. Emma, Luca called after her. She didn't stop. She threw her few belongings into her bag. She didn't care about the clothes. She didn't care about the safety. She couldn't breathe in this penthouse anymore. It was filled with lies. She stormed back out, carrying her bag. Luca was standing in the hallway, blocking her path. Move, Emma said. You cannot go out there. Luca said, His voice was desperate. The photos are everywhere. The paparazzi will be hunting you. The Coles will be watching. I would rather take my chances with them than stay one more second with a liar. She spat. She pushed past him. Luca grabbed her arm gently, but firmly. Emma, please let me go. She looked at him with such raw hurt that Luca flinched. He released her arm. He stepped aside. Emma walked to the elevator. She punched the button. She didn't look back. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of Luca standing alone in his fortress. Luca stood there for a long time, staring at the closed doors. The silence of the penthouse returned, heavier than before. Nico watched him carefully. Boss? Luca walked to the window, looking down at the street 40 floors below. He watched until he saw a small figure exit the building, walking fast, head down against the wind. Get the team, Luca said quietly. To bring her back? Nico asked. No, Luca said. If I bring her back now, she will never trust me again. She needs to walk. She needs to feel the cold to know the heat is real. He pressed his hand against the glass, but put a detail on her. 4 men, 2 cars. Keep a 1-block perimeter. If anyone gets within 10 feet of her, you put them in the hospital. Do you understand? Understood, Nico said. Luca watched Emma turn the corner and disappear into the night. She is not a weapon, Luca whispered to the empty room. Not anymore. The subway ride back to her old neighborhood felt like a descent into a world that no longer recognized her. Emma Blake kept her head down, clutching the strap of her bag until her knuckles turned white. When she finally emerged onto the street where she had lived for 5 years, the air smelled of rain and exhaust, just as it always had. But the atmosphere had shifted. It was hostile. She walked up the familiar steps of her apartment building, her key jammed in the front door, refusing to turn. After jiggling it for a minute, she buzzed the superintendent, but the line went dead the moment she announced her name. Thankfully, a tenant she didn't know exited, and Emma caught the door before it swung shut. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs, her legs heavy with exhaustion. She just wanted to grab the photo album of her parents and the few pieces of jewelry her grandmother had left her. She wanted to reclaim the pieces of herself that existed before the gala. She turned the corner of the 4th floor hallway and stopped dead. Her apartment door was not how she had left it, across the peeling beige paint. Someone had taken a can of bright red spray paint and scrawled a single word in jagged, dripping letters: liar. Piled in the hallway underneath the graffiti were 3 black trash bags. One had split open, spilling her clothes onto the dirty linoleum. Her favorite sweater was trampled, covered in dust and a footprint. Emma stood frozen, her breath hitching in her throat. The violence of it was quiet but absolute. It was a message that she had been erased. A door down the hall creaked open. Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who used to bake Emma cookies for Christmas, peered out. Their eyes met. Emma took a step forward, a plea forming on her lips, but misses. Gable's face hardened. She looked at the red paint, then at Emma, and closed her door with a definitive click. They chose him. Emma whispered to the silence. They do not even know him, and they chose him. She knelt and touched the spilled sweater. It was ruined. Everything was ruined. The tears came then, hot and stinging, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a rage so pure it felt like it could burn the building down. She stood up, leaving the bags where they lay. She did not need the sweater. She did not need the photo album. She needed the truth. She pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked, but it worked. She looked up the location of the new coal development project, the Riverside Pinnacle. The news had been bragging about it all week. Adrian was scheduled for a site walkthrough today. If the world wanted to paint her as a villain, she would stop hiding. She would go to him. She would make him look her in the eye and say that he didn't do it. The Riverside Pinnacle was a skeleton of steel and concrete, rising 70 stories above the waterfront. It was an active construction site, surrounded by high fences and signs promising luxury living for the elite. Emma walked up to the security gate. She expected to be turned away. She expected to be yelled at instead. The guard in the booth looked at her ID, then looked at a clipboard. His expression shifted into something unreadable. "Mister?" "Cole is on the sublevel inspecting the parking structure," the guard said, buzzing the gate open. "He said to send you down if you arrived." Emma walked through. Her heart hammering against her ribs. It felt too easy. It felt like walking into a lion's den, but she was past the point of self-preservation. She took the construction elevator down, the metal cage rattling as it descended into the earth. The doors opened onto a vast, unfinished parking garage. It was a cavern of gray concrete, dimly lit by temporary work lights strung from the ceiling. The air was cold and smelled of wet cement and dust. There was no construction crew. There was only silence, amplified by the echo of dripping water. Emma stepped out. "Adrian?" she called out. Her voice bounced off the pillars. A car door slammed in the distance. From the shadows of a concrete ramp, 3 figures emerged. Adrian Cole walked in the center. He wore a pristine navy suit that looked jarringly out of place in the grim setting. Flanking him were 2 men, not security guards, but the same men who had cornered her on the street days ago, the enforcers. "You actually came," Adrian said, his voice smooth and amused. "I won the bet. I told my father you were stupid enough to try for a face-to-face. I want you to tell the truth," Emma said, her voice shaking but loud. "I want you to admit what you did." Adrian laughed, the sound sharp and echoing. "Admit it? To who? To the concrete. There is no one here. Emma. Just you and the consequences of your own bad decisions." He stopped 10 feet away from her. The 2 men spread out, flanking her, cutting off her path back to the elevator. "You are playing the victim so well," Adrian sneered. "But look at you now. You are not a victim. You are an associate of Luca Marino. Do you think the police will listen to the girlfriend of a mob boss? You have destroyed your own credibility better than my lawyers ever could." "He does not control me," Emma said, stepping back as the men moved closer. "And he has evidence. He has footage from the hallway." Adrian's smile faltered. A shadow passed over his face, his eyes darkening into the same flat, shark-like gaze she had seen in the hotel room. "Footage can be lost," Adrian said, his voice dropping. "Just like people." He nodded to the men. "Grab her." Emma turned to run, but they were on her instantly. Rough hands seized her arms, wrenching them behind her back. She screamed, the sound tearing through her throat, but the garage swallowed it whole. One of the men kicked the back of her knees, and she crashed down onto the cold, gritty concrete. Adrian stepped closer, looming over her. He crouched down, careful not to let the dust touch his trousers. "You are going to disappear, Emma," he said softly, "and the story will be that you ran away out of shame, that you couldn't handle the guilt of lying about a Cole." He reached out, grabbing her jaw just as he had in the hotel room, forcing her to look at him. Or, you can sign a statement today, right now, saying you made it all up for money. Those are your choices. Silence or death. Emma spat in his face. Adrian recoiled, wiping his cheek with a look of pure disgust. He stood up, his face twisting into violence. Finish it, he ordered the men. The man holding Emma's left arm shifted his grip, raising a heavy fist. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the darkness. It never came. A thunderous crash echoed through the garage as a heavy metal door on the far side of the level was kicked off its hinges. Adrian spun around. Luca Marino did not walk in. He stormed in like a natural disaster. He was flanked by 4 of his men, but Luca was the first one through the breach. He held a handgun at his side, his face a mask of concentrated, lethal fury. "Emma!" Luca roared, his voice filling the cavern. Adrian's enforcers froze, caught between their target and the sudden arrival of a superior force. "Let her go," Luca commanded, raising his weapon. Adrian panicked. He scrambled backward, putting a concrete pillar between himself and Luca. "Kill him!" Adrian shrieked. The garage erupted into chaos. Adrian's men reached for their waistbands, but they were slow, hired muscle used to intimidating defenseless women, not fighting a war. Luca fired twice. The shots were deafening in the enclosed space. He didn't aim to kill, he aimed to dismantle. One bullet sparked off the concrete near the enforcer's feet, sending stone shrapnel flying. The second struck the man holding Emma in the shoulder. The grip on Emma loosened. She scrambled away on her hands and knees, crawling behind a stack of drywall sheets. Luca moved forward, fluid and terrifying. He holstered his gun and engaged the second enforcer hand to hand. It was brutal and efficient. There was the sickening sound of a fist connecting with a jaw, the thud of a body being slammed into a pillar. It wasn't the cinematic fighting of movies. It was the messy, desperate violence of survival. Luca threw the man to the ground and didn't stop to check on him. He vaulted over a pile of debris, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Emma, where are you? I am here," she cried out. Luca reached her. He grabbed her arm, pulling her up from the floor. He shoved her behind him, interposing his body between her and the rest of the garage. "Are you hit?" he demanded, scanning her frantically. "No," Emma gasped, clinging to the back of his leather jacket. "Just bruised." Luca's men had secured the perimeter. The 2 enforcers were on the ground, groaning, but the space where Adrian had been standing was empty. He ran. One of Luca's men called out, pointing to a service stairwell door that was swinging shut. Luca took a step to follow, his hand tightening on his weapon, his eyes burning with the need to finish it. But then he felt Emma's hands shaking against his back. He heard the ragged, terrified hitch in her breathing. He stopped. He looked at the door where Adrian had fled. Then he looked back at Emma. She was pale, covered in concrete dust, her eyes wide with shock. If he left her now to chase vengeance, he would lose her forever. "Let him run," Luca said, his voice rough. "We're leaving. Now." They did not go back to the penthouse. It was too exposed, and Emma had made it clear she felt trapped there. Instead, the convoy of SUVs took them to a safe house on the outskirts of the city, a reinforced basement level of an old industrial bakery that Luca's family owned. It was stark, lined with brick and smelling faintly of yeast and old iron, but it was impenetrable. Luca led Emma into a small room furnished with a simple cot and a table. He closed the heavy steel door, locking out the world, locking out his men, locking out the noise. Emma stood in the center of the room. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hollow trembling. She wrapped her arms around herself, but she couldn't stop shaking. She kept seeing the concrete floor rushing up to meet her. She kept feeling the phantom grip of hands on her arms. Luca stood by the door, watching her. He had taken off his jacket. His shirt was torn at the sleeve, and there was a smear of blood, not his, on his collar. He looked like he wanted to come to her, but he stayed rooted, respecting the distance she had demanded earlier that day. "You are safe," Luca said quietly. "No one gets in here." Emma looked at him. She saw the restraint in his posture. She saw the man who had walked into gunfire for her, the man who had let his enemy escape just to make sure she was okay. She didn't want distance. The distance was where the fear lived. The distance was where the cold was. I don't want to be safe, Emma whispered. Her voice was cracked. Luca frowned, confused. Emma, I want to feel something else, she said, her voice rising, bordering on hysterical. I want to feel alive. I am so tired of being scared. Luca, I am so tired of being broken. She crossed the room. It was a clumsy, desperate movement. She crashed into him, pressing her body against his chest, clutching his shirt in her fists. Luca's hands came up automatically to steady her, gripping her upper arms, but he tried to step back. Emma, you are in shock, he said, his voice strained. You don't know what you are doing. I know exactly what I am doing, she fiercely countered. She reached up, cupping his face with both hands. Her fingers were cold, stained with the dust of the garage. Her eyes blazed up at him, a fragile, volatile mix of terror and longing. She needed to overwrite the memory of Adrian's touch with something real, something consensual, something powerful. Kiss me, she begged. Please, make me feel real. Luca looked down at her. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the clarity. He saw a woman reclaiming her own body from the narrative of victimhood. His resistance shattered. He let out a low groan, a sound of surrendered control. His hands slid from her arms to cradle her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears that streaked the dust on her cheeks. Luca lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It couldn't be. It was fierce and aching, a collision of two people who had just walked out of the dark. His mouth was hot and demanding, tasting of danger and relief. Emma gasped, opening to him, welcoming the intrusion because this time she had asked for it. This time, it was hers. She knotted her fingers into his hair, pulling him closer, anchoring him to her. Luca's hands moved. He slid them down her neck, over her shoulders, tracing the line of her spine through her clothes. He pulled her flush against him. Emma could feel the hard wall of his chest, the rapid, thunderous beat of his heart mirroring her own. They stumbled back until Emma hit the wall, and Luca pressed against her, shielding her even here. His forehead rested against hers, their breath mingling in sharp, ragged gasps. He slowed down. He forced himself to slow down. His hands stopped their frantic searching and settled on her waist, heavy and warm. He kissed her jaw, her temple, the corner of her mouth. He was mapping her, reminding her that her body belonged to her, that his touch was a question, not a command. Emma trembled in his arms, but the cold was gone. The numbness was gone. She felt every inch of her skin, every nerve ending, firing. She felt alive. Luca pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. His pupils were blown wide, his expression raw and unguarded. I have you, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. I have you. Emma, I swear to you, I will make them see. I will make the whole world see what was done to you. Not who you stood beside, but who you are. Emma leaned her head back against the brick wall, trying to catch her breath. She felt grounded. She felt solid. She looked at Luca, this man who had become her protector, her partner, and now her anchor. I have something, she whispered. Luca brushed a stray hair from her forehead. What do you mean? Emma reached into the pocket of her jeans. Her hand was shaking, but she managed to pull out her phone. The screen was cracked in a spiderweb pattern from when she had been thrown to the ground, but the red light on the screen was still pulsing. I hit record, she said, in the garage. When I saw him coming, Luca went still. He looked at the phone, then back at her. He said it. Emma said, her voice gaining strength. He admitted it. He said he handled me. He said no one would believe me over his name. She pressed the stop button and hit play. The audio was messy. It was filled with the echo of the garage and the rustle of fabric. But through the static, Adrian's voice cut through, arrogant and undeniable. You are playing the victim. Footage can be lost. Silence or death. It was a confession. It was a threat. It was the sound of a man who believed he was a god, caught on a recording that would turn him into a convict. Luca listened to the end. When the recording stopped, the silence in the safe room was heavy, but it was no longer fearful. It was pregnant with victory. He looked at Emma with a mixture of awe and savage satisfaction. "Nico," Luca yelled toward the door, not breaking eye contact with Emma. "Get in here." The heavy steel door opened. Nico stepped in, looking worried, but he stopped when he saw the phone in Luca's hand. "What is it?" Nico asked. Luca took the phone from Emma gently, as if it were made of glass. He handed it to Nico. "Clean up the audio," Luca said, a dark smile touching his lips. "We have the weapon." Nico looked at the waveform on the screen, his eyes widening. "Is this—" "It is the end of the Cole Empire," Luca said. He turned back to Emma. He didn't touch her, but the look that passed between them was more intimate than the kiss had been. It was a partnership forged in fire. "They will believe," Luca said softly, "because now we are going to force them to listen." Emma took a deep breath. She looked at her dirty hands, then at the man standing before her. She wasn't the paralegal who served drinks anymore. She was the woman who had walked into a trap and walked out with the truth. "Do it," Emma said. "Burn them down." The plan Luca laid out on the mahogany table of the safe house was not a legal strategy. It was an act of war. "We are not going to leak this to a blog," Luca said, his voice steady and cold. "We are not going to mail a USB drive to the police commissioner and hope he is not on the payroll. We are going to burn them down in front of the entire city." He pointed to a date on the calendar. Saturday night, the Ravenshore Civic Gala. It was the event of the season, a fundraiser televised live on the local networks, attended by every politician, judge, and wealthy donor in the state. The Coles were the guests of honor. They were scheduled to announce the groundbreaking of the Riverside Pinnacle, the very project where Adrian had tried to have Emma killed. "It is too dangerous," Emma said. Looking at the schematic of the ballroom, "There will be hundreds of people. Security will be everywhere." "Exactly," Luca said. "Cameras will be everywhere. They cannot bury what happens on live television. They cannot intimidate 1,000,000 viewers." Emma felt a chill slide down her spine. The idea of walking onto a stage, of standing in front of the people who had called her a liar and a gold digger, terrified her more than the dark parking garage had. But then she thought of the red paint on her door. She thought of Adrian's laugh. "I will do it," she said. The next 3 days were a blur of high-tension preparation. Emma barely slept. She spent her nights pacing the floor of the safe room, rehearsing the statement she would give. She whispered the words to the mirror, trying to keep her voice from shaking, trying to turn her trauma into a weapon. Luca was always there. He did not sleep either. He spent his time with Nico and his crew, drilling security protocols, mapping exit routes, and bribing venue staff to look the other way when his men entered the building. But whenever Emma faltered, whenever she stopped pacing and put her head in her hands, she would feel his gaze. He would watch her from the doorway, his jaw tight with worry. He never told her to stop. He never told her it was too much. He simply stood guard, a silent promise that if the world tried to crush her, it would have to go through him first. On the night of the gala, the air in the city was crisp and clear. Emma stood in the entryway of the safe house. She was not wearing a uniform this time. She wore a dress Luca had procured for her, a deep midnight blue silk that draped elegantly over her frame. It was simple, devoid of sequins or flash. It was serious. It made her look not like a prop, but like a woman who had come to settle a debt. Luca walked over to her. He was dressed in a tuxedo, the holster beneath his jacket invisible but palpable. He stopped in front of her, his eyes scanning her face, looking for cracks in her armor. "You do not have to do this," he said quietly. "We can find another way. We can disappear." "No," Emma said. "I am done disappearing." Luca nodded slowly. He reached out and adjusted the collar of the trench coat she wore over her dress. His fingers brushed the skin of her throat, lingering there for a heartbeat. His touch was warm, a stark contrast to the cold metal of the gun he carried. "I will be in the crowd," he murmured, his thumb grazing her pulse. "I will be watching everyone who looks at you. If anyone moves toward you, they will regret it." He pulled his hand away, the loss of contact leaving a physical ache in the air between them. "Let us go," he said. The grand ballroom of the convention center was a sea of diamonds and black ties. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, a cruel echo of the night Emma's life had been derailed. Gregory Cole stood on the brightly lit stage, bathed in the glow of massive LED screens. He looked regal, the picture of a benevolent patriarch. Adrian stood beside him, looking smug and untouchable, waving to the applause. "Tonight is about the future," Gregory boomed into the microphone, his voice amplified to the rafters. "It is about safety. It is about progress. The Cole Foundation is dedicated to making Ravenshore a city where families can walk the streets without fear." Emma stood in the wings of the stage, concealed by a heavy velvet curtain. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She gripped the microphone Luca had given her, her knuckles white. Beside her, one of Luca's men gave her a sharp nod. Now, on the stage, Gregory raised a glass. "To the truth," he declared, as if on cue. The massive screens behind him flickered. The logo of the Cole Foundation distorted, pixelating into static. The polite jazz music cut out with a screech of feedback. A hush fell over the room. 3,000 people turned their heads. Then, a sound filled the hall. It was not music, it was a voice. "You are playing the victim." The audio was crisp and clear. Nico had done his work. Adrian's voice, arrogant and cruel, echoed off the walls. "No one will believe a woman with ties to a mafia boss." Silence or death. On the screens, images began to cycle. They were not the polished renderings of the new building. They were grainy security photos. Emma walking into the hotel room. Emma running out. Her dress torn. The medical report from the emergency room. The timestamp matching the video. The eviction notice. The red graffiti on her door. The crowd gasped. A murmur rose like a wave, turning into a roar of confusion and shock. On stage, Adrian's face went the color of ash. He lunged for the podium, trying to grab the microphone from his father. "Turn it off," Adrian screamed, his voice cracking. "It is a fake! It is a setup! Cut the sound!" But the sound did not cut. It got louder. I handled her." Emma stepped out from behind the curtain. The spotlight hit her. It was blinding. For a second, she wanted to run. She wanted to dissolve into the floor. But then she looked at Adrian. She saw the panic in his eyes. She saw the fear. She walked to the center of the stage. Her knees were shaking so hard she thought she might fall. But she planted her feet. She lifted her microphone. "He is right," Emma said. Her voice trembled, but it carried through the speakers, cutting through the chaos. "He did handle me." The room went silent. Emma looked out at the sea of faces, the politicians who had ignored her, the donors who had judged her. "My name is Emma Blake," she said. "I was a server at the Cole Gala 3 weeks ago. I went into a room to do my job, and Adrian Cole assaulted me." "Liar!" Adrian shouted, moving toward her, his hands balled into fists. "She is a whore. She is lying." He took 2 steps toward her. From the front row of the audience, a shadow moved. Luca vaulted onto the stage. He did not draw his weapon. He didn't have to. He simply stepped between Emma and Adrian. He stood there, a wall of dark intent, his hands hanging loose at his sides. 4 of his men appeared at the edges of the stage, their presence an undeniable reminder that the balance of power had shifted. Adrian skidded to a halt. He looked at Luca, and he saw his own destruction staring back at him. Emma did not flinch. She kept speaking. "I went to the police," she said, her voice gaining strength. "They told me it was complicated. I went to my boss. They fired me. I went to my apartment. I was evicted." She looked directly at the camera, broadcasting live to the city. "I lost everything because I told the truth. And everyone in this room, everyone in this city looked away. You looked away because his name is Cole and my name is nothing." She took a deep breath, and her voice cracked on the final words. "No one believed me." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a city's conscience breaking. Then, the doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. Police officers flooded in, but they were not there to arrest the woman on stage. The state attorney, who had received a comprehensive digital package from Nico 5 minutes prior, marched at the front of the line. The officers moved through the confused crowd. Some looked hesitant, glancing at Gregory Cole, their longtime benefactor. But the cameras were rolling. The evidence was on the giant screens. The audio of the confession was still playing on a loop in the background. There was nowhere to hide. Gregory Cole tried to maintain his dignity. "This is an outrage," he bellowed. "Do you know who I am?" Officers swarmed the stage. They bypassed Emma and Luca. They went straight for the men in the tuxedos. "Get down," an officer shouted, grabbing Adrian's arm. Adrian struggled. "Get off me! My father will have your badge! Get on your knees!" the officer roared, kicking Adrian's legs out from under him. Adrian Cole, the heir to the empire. The man who had laughed in the concrete garage, hit the floor. He landed on his knees, his expensive trousers staining on the carpet. Beside him, Gregory Cole was forced down, his arms wrenched behind his back, the handcuffs clicking with a sound that seemed to echo louder than the speakers. Emma stood there, clutching the microphone. She watched them. The phrase echoed in her mind, "They will believe when they kneel." She looked at Adrian's face. He was not looking at the cameras. He was looking at the floor, weeping with rage and humiliation. Emma looked out at the crowd. She saw the faces of the elite. The disgust had shifted. It was no longer directed at her. They were looking at the Coles with horror. They were looking at Emma with shock. And then, slowly, with recognition. She lowered the microphone. She didn't need to say anything else. Luca turned to her. The chaos of the arrests swirled around them, shouting officers, flashing cameras, the roar of the press. But he created a quiet space just by looking at her. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," Emma whispered. The aftermath was a hurricane. The arrest of the Coles was the lead story on every news channel in the country. The audio recording was played on repeat. The chain of custody complications vanished overnight as the state attorney scrambled to save his own reputation by throwing the book at Adrian. Emma's name trended online for 3 days straight. The hashtag #ISSTandWithEmma replaced the vitriol. She received thousands of messages, apologies from strangers who had called her a liar, job offers from law firms, statements of support from the very hotel that had fired her. She was vindicated. She was a hero. But victory had a price. Luca sat in the safe house, watching the news coverage on a muted television. He knew the mechanics of the world better than anyone. He had exposed the Coles, but in doing so, he had exposed himself. He had walked onto a stage in front of the police and the cameras. He had declared war not just on a family, but on the status quo. The FBI was already building a task force. The rival families, sensing weakness and chaos, were circling. He could not stay, and he could not take her with him. If she stayed with him, she would never be free of the stigma. She would always be the mob boss's girl, not the survivor who spoke truth to power. He made a call. 2 hours later, he sat across from a federal prosecutor in an unmarked car. "I am leaving," Luca said, "and I am giving you the network." The prosecutor looked skeptical. "You are turning yourself in?" "No," Luca said. "I am disappearing, but I am giving you the ledgers, the unions, the Port Authority bribes, the names of the judges on the payroll. You get all of it. You get to be the man who cleaned up Ravenshore." "And in exchange?" the prosecutor asked. "Emma Blake is off limits," Luca said. "No charges for accessory, no harassment, and you drop the warrant for my immediate arrest so I can leave the country tonight." The prosecutor weighed the options, a career-making bust versus one man slipping away. "Done." The prosecutor said. The rooftop overlooked the entire city. The wind was cold, whipping Emma's hair across her face. She stood by the ledge, looking at the lights of Ravenshore. It looked peaceful from up here. She heard the heavy steel door open. She turned. Luca walked toward her. He was wearing a long black coat, the collar turned up against the wind. He carried a small duffel bag. Emma felt her heart stop. She knew what the bag meant. "You are leaving," she said. "I have to," Luca said. He stopped a few feet away. "The police are coming." "Emma." The sharks are in the water. I bought you peace, but the price is my absence." "No," Emma said, rushing to him. She grabbed the lapels of his coat, clinging to him. "We can fight them. You have money. You have lawyers. This is not a fight we can win in a courtroom," Luca said gently. He covered her hands with his. "And I will not drag you into a life on the run. You just got your life back. You need to live it. I don't want it without you." Emma cried, tears spilling over. "I don't care about the reputation. I care about you. You are the only one who saw me." Luca let go of his bag. It dropped to the gravel roof with a thud. He reached for her. He pulled her against him with a desperation that mirrored her own. One of his hands splayed wide at the small of her back, pressing her into him. The other cradled the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. He kissed her. It was a slow, deliberate kiss. It was not the frantic collision of the safe room. It was a goodbye. He was memorizing the taste of her, the feel of her breath, the curve of her lips. He kissed her until the world narrowed down to the two of them, suspended above the city they had conquered together. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. His eyes were dark and shining. "You are not the woman no one believes anymore," he whispered fiercely. "You are the woman who made powerful men kneel. Never forget that. Please." Emma sobbed. "I have to go," Luca said. He kissed her forehead once. A benediction. He pulled away. It took every ounce of his strength to let her go. He picked up his bag. He looked at her one last time, etching her image into his mind to sustain him in the exile to come. Then he turned and walked through the door into the darkness. 6 months later. The spring air was warm. Emma walked down the steps of the Ravenshore courthouse. She wore a sharp gray suit. She had just finished filing a motion for her new job. She was now the lead paralegal at a firm dedicated to victims' rights. She walked with her head high. People recognized her. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away. She didn't care. She knew who she was. She stopped at her mailbox on the way home. Amidst the bills and flyers, there was an envelope. It had no return address. The stamp was from a country she had to squint to read. Emma's heart leaped. She tore it open right there on the sidewalk. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was bold and familiar. "The shadows are long here, but I watch the news. I see you standing in the light. Build your life, Emma. Make it strong, because one day the heat will die down, and when I return, I want to stand beside you in the light, not pull you into the darkness. Wait for me." Emma pressed the letter to her chest, right over her heart. She closed her eyes and smiled. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated hope. She looked up at the sun. She was ready to build. She was ready to wait, because she knew, with the certainty of a woman who had walked through fire, that their bond was forged in truth. And truth was the one thing that could never be broken. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Emma and Luca. It was an emotional ride from the depths of despair to the heights of justice. Please leave a comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to know how far this story has traveled. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of passion, danger, and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did you like the ending? What do you think happens when Luca finally comes back? I can't wait to read your theories.